want to ask you this question, Brianna, regarding the external threat. So you just went through a exercise where you restructured the show using its existing elements as it was, but putting
Yeah,
them in
mostly.
different orders. And if you were to not so constrain yourself, would you use an external threat to unify Zaun and Piltover, or would you try to do it in a different way?
I don't know. That's I can't answer that as a first thought.
Well, I'll give you a way you kind of answered it, which is an interesting way. That you kind of implied, and also by the sparrow analogy that Doug put out, that you had moved it from an external threat to an internal threat.
Oh yeah,
you're right. I guess it is an internal threat, not an external threat. Huh?
Yeah. So I was wondering about that. That like oh my God, the army marching across to them, and everybody had better stand up on the walls of the city together, because that even if the cult were infiltrating both of them.
Ooh, yeah.
So then because you might need.
That's
I haven't thought
good.
about
I like
great
that.
detail later. I haven't thought about this in as much detail as obviously Brianna has, but I still don't like the external threat resolution. It might work, but I really like the idea of some type of mutual corrupting internal threat that serves as a catalyst for them to actually address their issues. It can't just be like, oh, everybody, we go man the walls. Because like, if we don't, we're all going to die.
They did that quick.
It could be like they each try to deal with that internal threat, and neither of them can on their own.
And neither of them can on their own.
Yeah.
Right. And so they've got to get together and they actually deal with their issues. That's how I think it should be.
I like that.
I'll tell you, I'm doing some of that in my current book, where there is some of this infiltrating going on both sides. And what's weird is once you get into this, you're never really in alliance. It's always kind of like looking over your shoulder type of alliance. So it actually makes for good storytelling, because you're like, okay, maybe we can work together to push them out. But then this one guy takes advantage of it, and now both sides want to fight again. Like it gets real fragile.
Yeah, and see, that would have been a fun thing to play with for an entire other season, right? Like, this very tentative alliance, and that's how you maintain some complexity. Like, it's not just like, okay, everything's good now. Like, okay, now we've defeated this internal threat, and then we see someone from Zaun being on that board, and then it's like, now the real work is going to begin, and that's where you end the story, right? Like, we're taking our steps towards that complicated ideal goal of trying to get along, and it's never going to be perfect, but you're moving in that direction. I think that would have been a more satisfying and kind of realistic way to handle that theme.
The Titterpig RPG, Titterpig Rancher for $10. Thank you very much. Sable says, "You're right, Heath. These are my favorite kind of super chats to get." You're right. Even season 1 set up the Arcane as the real threat and intelligent, with Viktor's line of "the Arcane speaks through them. He always needed to be the vessel of the grander conflict." So yeah,
well, they always set up that. Yeah, they set up always, and it was so good that Hex Tech is a double-edged sword. It gives you all these things, but that there's this really big dark side that everyone seems to be ignoring. So they did set it up in season 1. They could have done a lot.
It's we're talking about an internal threat, the geographic element of that, because of course Viktor was internal. He's one of the assistant to one of the counselors and all of that, so he's internal, all of that. But just moving the geographic center of that from wherever it is that they are, and we didn't really know, but outside to know, we want that cult to be right in the middle of all of this. Moving that physically inside changes a lot.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I definitely like that better than what we got. And it sounds like even the writers are conceding that they kind of blew it on some level. And it is a shame.
To watch that. Like, I would have loved to see that show that I just described.
Yeah,
both seasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would have been good. And I think it would have been consistent with the characters as presented already in season 1, in which they worked at, and not just worked. They worked at some of the highest levels for characterization. Right. I also felt, and I'll get into some of this in a second, but the lesser storytelling took away opportunities, I think, from the animators to do some really cool stuff. I mean, I would have loved to have seen a real, genuine tactical effort between of Piltover and Zaun fighting each other. The action could have been great, especially because you care about the characters and the situation at stake. You've been invested in it since season 1. So I would have loved to have seen what the animators came up for all that. But as such, they just took those opportunities away with quick, easy, or cheap scenarios, in my opinion. And I do want to say that the animators are still the greatest thing about season 2.
Absolutely.
I saw Titterpig says, "Thank you for $5." Titterpig says Viktor was always the most interesting part of the show, even in season 1. That doesn't mean he's the emotional core of it. That's always Vi and Jinx.
Right.
Well, sometimes that happens, that another character emerges is really uninteresting.
Well, and Druden Fuzz says that the name of the show is Arcane. Therefore, it's not called the Vi and Jinx show. But Druden Fuzz, I can't connect to Arcane. In fact, I'm not even positive what exactly Arcane is. I have some loose understandings that the show has given me some idea of what Arcane is. I can't emotionally connect with that. I can emotionally connect with Vi. I can emotionally connect with Jinx. And I can emotionally connect to Vi and Jinx as a sisterhood. So I think that emotional connection has been my strongest as a viewer. And I bet a lot of people would agree with that. There could be other characters that other people feel strong about, but I think that emotional connection is what's driving the story the most, not necessarily any emotional connection to Arcane.